Hey everyone, welcome back to the English Hustle podcast. Today we're diving into a topic that can seriously make a difference in your learning journey. Techniques for memorizing information quickly. Whether you're a student, professional, or just someone who loves learning new things, we all know how important it is to retain information effectively.
Absolutely, Alex. Memory is such a powerful tool, and mastering it can give you a real edge. In fact, today's episode is packed with practical methods, from visual techniques to tips for organizing information in a way that your brain naturally remembers it better.
Exactly. And with the amount of information we encounter daily, knowing how to memorize it effectively can save time and reduce stress. So, if you're ready to learn faster and retain information like never before, this episode is for you.
Let's get started with some of the science behind memory and then jump into specific techniques you can try out right away.
All right, let's unlock those memory skills and get learning. Hey, Maria! Before we dive into specific memory techniques, let's talk about some key terms that'll come up. These are words that can help listeners understand the science and methods behind memorization better. I think starting with mnemonic is a good idea. Don't you?
Definitely. So, for anyone new to the term, a mnemonic is just a tool or technique to help us remember information. It's like creating shortcuts in your mind. Think of the way we use the acronym Roy G. Biv to remember the colors of the rainbow.
Exactly. Mnemonics are all about simplifying complex information. Another popular one is chunking Maria. You're actually the chunking pro here. How would you describe it?
Thanks, Alex. Well, chunking is when we break information down into smaller, easier-to-remember bits. Instead of trying to memorize one long string, we organize it into sections, like how we remember a phone number as 12345678890, instead of trying to memorize all 10 digits in a row.
Perfect example. And chunking works wonders with longer lists or information-heavy topics. Let's move to another key term, retrieval. It's the process of recalling information that's stored in our memory. Research shows that practicing retrieval or actively recalling information makes it stick better.
Yes. When we study, it's easy to think rereading is enough, but actively trying to pull that information out really strengthens it. Retrieval is like a workout for your brain. Now, how about visualization? This is one of my favorites because it's so creative.
Mine too. Visualization is when we create mental images to remember something. A lot of people use this by picturing themselves actually doing the task or associating vivid images with facts they're trying to learn. It's amazing how powerful our brains are when we use images.
Absolutely. Visualization is powerful. And that brings us to our last term, association. This technique is about linking new information with things you already know. Like when I meet someone named Rose, I picture a rose flower to help remember their name.
That's a great trick. Association gives our brain an anchor point, making new information feel more familiar. So now that we're clear on mnemonics, chunking, retrieval, visualization, and association, I think we're ready to go deeper into how we can use these techniques in real-life scenarios.
Perfect. Listeners, keep these terms in mind as we explore each technique and see how you can apply them to your own memory toolkit.
All right, let's jump in and make remembering easier. Welcome back to the English Hustle podcast. Today, we're diving into some practical techniques for memorizing information quickly. We've all been there, trying to cram information for an exam or remember key points for a presentation. But what if there were ways to make memorization not only faster, but also more effective?
That's right. And we're not just talking about studying harder. We're talking about techniques that are scientifically proven to help our brains store and retrieve information better. To start us off, let's talk about one of the oldest tricks in the book, mnemonics.
Mnemonics are all about creating shortcuts in your mind. Maria, do you have any favorite mnemonics that you use?
I do. One I love is the acronym method. For example, remembering the order of operations in math with PEMDAS, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. The letters serve as cues that guide your memory.
That's a classic. Another fun one is creating a story. So, if I need to remember a shopping list, I might picture a story where each item in my list is part of a funny sequence. By the end, I've not only memorized my list, but also had a bit of fun doing it.
That's a great idea. Stories make everything so much more memorable. Let's keep these mnemonic methods in mind as we discuss other techniques because they often work well together.
Now, chunking is another powerful technique that's worth discussing. It's about breaking down information into smaller, manageable units. Chunking works because our brains can only hold a certain amount of information at once. When we break it down into chunks, it becomes easier to process. Think of how we remember phone numbers. Instead of memorizing 10 random numbers, we remember them in chunks.
Exactly. And it doesn't just work with numbers. When you're learning a language, for example, grouping vocabulary by theme like colors, food, or travel can help too.
Definitely. Listeners, try chunking when you're overwhelmed with information. It can make even the most complex topics seem more manageable. All right, let's talk about retrieval practice. This is one of my personal favorites because it's about actively pulling information from memory rather than passively reviewing it. Maria, why is retrieval so powerful?
Retrieval practice is like a workout for the brain. When you actively try to recall information, you're strengthening your memory pathways. It's like your brain is saying, "Oh, this is important. Let's keep it stored."
Yes! And it doesn't have to be complicated. Just take a few minutes after studying to close the book and try to remember what you learned. Even a self-quiz can do wonders.
Totally. And I'd add that retrieval is especially helpful for long-term retention. So if you want to remember information beyond just a test, this is the way to go.
Let's move to association. This technique is about linking new information to something you already know. Maria, why do you think association is so effective?
I think association works because our brains like connections. When you tie something new to something familiar, it feels less foreign. For instance, if you meet someone named April, you might link it to the month of April, which can make it easier to recall.
Yes. It makes new information feel less like a stranger and more like an old friend. It's like building a bridge between what you know and what you're learning.
And it's flexible too. You can link facts, numbers, names, almost anything. So if you're looking for a method to make information stick, association is a solid choice.
All right. The last technique we want to cover is spaced repetition. This technique involves reviewing information at gradually increasing intervals. Maria, why do you think spacing out study sessions is so effective?
Spaced repetition taps into the way our brains naturally remember things over time. Instead of cramming, which is like sprinting, spaced repetition is like taking a series of short, focused runs. Each session reinforces the memory, helping it move from short-term to long-term storage.
I totally agree. And there are even apps now, like Anki and Quizlet, that automate spaced repetition for you. They schedule when you need to review each piece of information, so you don't have to keep track yourself.
Right. And it's useful for all kinds of information. Vocabulary, historical dates, even medical terms. Spaced repetition works for almost anything.
All right. So today we covered a lot. Mnemonics, chunking, retrieval practice, visualization, association, and spaced repetition. Maria, do you have any final tips for our listeners as they start applying these techniques?
My biggest tip is to experiment. Not every technique will work for everyone, but when you find the ones that work for you, they can make learning so much easier and even more enjoyable.
Absolutely. And consistency is key. These techniques work best when you make them a regular part of your learning. So, whether you're studying for an exam or trying to remember people's names, keep practicing.
Well said, Alex. And to all our listeners, if you found these tips helpful, give them a try and let us know how it goes. We'd love to hear your experiences.
That's right. Remember, learning is a journey, and with the right tools, it can be a lot smoother. All right, everyone. To bring these techniques to life, let's share a short story that shows how they can be applied in real situations. This is the story of Emma, a college student who's preparing for her finals. She's got a lot to memorize, and she's feeling pretty overwhelmed. But with some strategic memorization techniques, she's able to turn things around.
It's the night before finals week, and Emma is staring at her laptop, surrounded by a mountain of notes, highlighters, and sticky notes. She has 3 major subjects to cover: history, biology, and psychology. She's stressed, feeling like there's no way she'll remember all of this information.
Exactly. Emma's biggest struggle is in history, where she has to remember key dates and events. She starts flipping through her notes, rereading pages, but feeling like nothing is sticking. It's a frustrating cycle.
But then, she remembers her friend's advice about using mnemonics. She decides to try it out, even though she's a bit skeptical at first.
Emma starts with mnemonics, creating a few acronyms to remember the causes of historical events. For example, she turns the reasons for World War I into mania, militarism, alliances, nationalism, imperialism, and assassination. Suddenly, the information feels a bit more manageable.
It's a small win, but it gives her the confidence to keep going. Next, she applies chunking to her biology notes. Instead of trying to memorize a long list of terms, she groups similar concepts together. She puts all the parts of a cell in one chunk, and then tackles each function in another chunk.
And by breaking things down this way, the information doesn't seem so intimidating. Plus, chunking gives her a clear study plan, which helps with the overwhelm.
Moving on to psychology, Emma needs to remember different theories and famous psychologists. Shrek tries out visualization here, creating mental images of each psychologist and their main theories. For instance, she imagines Freud holding a magnifying glass, looking at a brain, representing his focus on the mind.
I love that. Visualization really brings these concepts to life for Emma. And when it comes to remembering specific theories, she uses association by linking new terms to things she already knows. For example, she links Pavlov's dog experiment with her own dog's habit of coming to the kitchen whenever he hears her chopping food.
By connecting new ideas to familiar ones, Emma finds it easier to remember the psychology material. It's amazing how making these small associations speeds up the memorization process.
Now that Emma has used mnemonics, chunking, visualization, and association to process all her notes, she moves on to retrieval practice. She closes her notes and quizzes herself, trying to recall as much information as possible.
And each time she gets stuck, she refers back to her notes, reinforcing those memory connections. This active recall helps make her study session way more effective. And each time she gets stuck, she refers back to her notes, reinforcing those memory connections. This active recall helps make her study session way more effective. So, on exam day, Emma feels way more confident. Thanks to mnemonics, chunking, visualization, association, retrieval, and spaced repetition, she's able to recall information easily and even enjoy the process. It's like she finally cracked the code to memorization.
Exactly. And her story shows that these techniques are tools anyone can use, not just super learners or memory experts. Whether you're studying for exams, preparing for a big presentation, or just learning for fun, these techniques can make memorization easier and even enjoyable.
Absolutely. So, listeners, if you've been feeling like Emma, stressed out by the thought of memorizing everything at once, try out some of these techniques. They might just change the way you approach learning.
And remember, it's all about working smarter, not harder. Thanks for joining us for Emma's story, and we hope it inspires you to give these memory techniques a try. All right, everyone, it's time for some fun facts about memory. We've talked about techniques to improve our memory, but there's so much more to learn about how our brains work when it comes to storing and recalling information. Let's dive into a few surprising facts that will make you appreciate just how powerful and quirky our memories can be.
Did you know that people forget around 50% of new information within an hour of learning it? This is called the forgetting curve. And it was discovered by psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus in the 19th century. It shows that our brains naturally forget things over time, especially if we don't revisit them.
That's amazing. It explains why we often feel like information slips away if we don't review it. But what's cool is that techniques like spaced repetition, which we talked about earlier, can actually counteract the forgetting curve.
Exactly. Reviewing information at spaced intervals tricks our brain into thinking the information is important, which helps us retain it for longer. So if you're trying to memorize something, just reviewing it once or twice won't do. You've got to spread it out.
Here's a fun fact. The idea of using memory palaces to store information dates back to ancient Greece and Rome. Famous orators like Cicero used this method to memorize long speeches. A memory palace involves visualizing a familiar place, like your house, and placing information in different rooms.
Wow, that's amazing. So, you're saying that people have been using mental visualization techniques for thousands of years?
Exactly. By associating ideas with specific locations in your mental palace, you create a unique, personal way to store information. It's still a popular memory technique used by memory champions today.
And it's perfect for people who think in pictures or enjoy using their imagination. Plus, it's a fun, creative way to remember things. Have you ever heard of photographic memory, Alex? It's often said that some people can remember everything they see in perfect detail. But surprisingly, True photographic memory is actually really rare, and some scientists even question if it really exists.
That's right. Most people who seem to have a photographic memory are actually using advanced visualization or other memory techniques, rather than remembering every single detail perfectly. There are cases of people with an incredible memory, but it's not usually like a mental photograph.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that anyone can improve their memory to impressive levels through practice and the right techniques, even if they don't have a so-called photographic memory.
Here's a surprising fact that I think everyone will love. Sleep plays a huge role in consolidating memory. While we're asleep, our brains are working hard to process and store everything we learned during the day. Without enough sleep, our ability to retain new information drops significantly.
It's amazing how important sleep is for our brains. This is especially true for deep sleep stages where memory consolidation happens. So pulling an all-nighter to study might actually hurt your memory more than help it.
Yes! It's actually better to study with breaks and get a good night's sleep. Sleep acts like a natural memory booster. So next time you're preparing for an exam or presentation, make sure to prioritize sleep. All right? That wraps up our fun facts about memory. From ancient memory techniques to the importance of sleep, there's so much to learn about how our memories work.
And hopefully, these fun facts inspire our listeners to give their brains the support they need to remember things better. Memory is a powerful tool, and with a bit of knowledge and practice, we can all tap into its potential.
Thanks for joining us for this fun facts segment. Now, let's get back to our main discussion. Welcome back to the English Hustle podcast. We're diving into memory techniques today. Maria, what do you think people overlook about memorization?
They often think it has to be boring or just about repetition, but memorization can be engaging if you use the right techniques.
Absolutely. Let's start with mnemonics. These are like shortcuts for the brain. Have any favorites, Maria?
I love mnemonics for lists. For example, my very educated mother just served us. Nachos helps me remember the planets.
I use mnemonics too. They're quick and can be personalized, which makes learning fun. All right, everyone. We've covered some powerful memory techniques today. From mnemonics and chunking to visualization, retrieval, association, and spaced repetition. Hopefully, you're feeling excited to try these in your own learning journey.
Absolutely. Memorizing information doesn't have to be a struggle. With the right tools, it can even be enjoyable. So let's quickly go over how these techniques can fit into your daily routine. Alex, any tips for incorporating them?
I'd say start small. Pick one or two techniques, like mnemonics for vocabulary and chunking for numbers. Try them in short sessions, like when you're studying or even running errands. The more you practice, the more natural it'll feel.
Yes, and don't be afraid to combine techniques. For instance, if you're learning a list of items, create a mnemonic and visualize each item on that list. The more personalized your approach, the better it will stick.
That's a great point. And spaced repetition is especially useful over time, so try to schedule quick reviews every few days to reinforce what you've learned.
To our listeners, we encourage you to reflect on which technique felt the most helpful during our practice session. What resonated with you? Think about how you might use these techniques in your studies, work, or daily life.
Take a few moments after this episode to set a plan for trying these out. Even one small change, like using visualization or association, can make a big difference.
Exactly. And remember, these techniques are tools you can adapt to your own style. Keep experimenting until you find what works best for you.
Before we wrap up, thank you to everyone tuning in. Learning is a journey, and we're so glad to be part of it with you.
Yes, we hope these memory techniques add some ease and enjoyment to your studies and daily life. Don't forget to reach out and share your experiences. We'd love to hear what's working for you.
And with that, we'll see you next time on the English Hustle podcast. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and remember that mastering memory is just one technique away.
Bye, everyone. Happy learning.